Test, test, test. Keep testing. Test, test, test. And this is the very first event held in this building, the Kenai River Classic Roundtable. My name is Shannon Martin. I'm the Executive Director for Kenai River Sportfishing Association, and I'm here today together with Kevin Delaney, our Senior Fisheries Management Consultant, to kick off this year's roundtable. First off, we want to briefly tell you about who we are, what we do, and how we do it, and provide a short list of examples. Thank you. The Kenai River Sportfishing Association, or KRISA, as you may hear us refer to it throughout the day, was founded in 1984 and has become Alaska's leading sport fishing organization. KRISA is a 501c3 nonprofit with a dedicated board of directors, staff, and passionate members. We advocate and we fight for sport fish and personal opportunity, healthy fish habitat, and the return of Kenai Kings. KRISA has, with your help and partnerships developed, raised over the decades millions of dollars to restore the fish habitat, build fishing access infrastructure, and provided representation in the regulatory process, and much, much more. Kevin?
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you all for coming. It's an honor to be here. It's passion for us, and we're happy to be here speaking with you today. So Shannon mentioned who we are, and she described that. I want to talk for just a few minutes about what we do, how we do it, and give you a couple examples. We have a process, and we first look to a set of touchstones and to our board of directors. And those touchstones are king salmon, habitat protection, and sport and personal use fishing opportunity. We're maybe the most active sport fishery conservation organization around, but we have limited resources. So we have to pick and choose those things that we get involved in. Again, king salmon, habitat, sport fishing, and personal use opportunities. How do we do it? Two words come to mind: professionalism and engagement. Professionalism, well, we're privileged to have a board of directors who are awesome. They're engaged with us. They're engaged with the communities, the businesses, and the politics of the state, and we thank them very much, those of us on the staff. Professionalism. Shannon and her staff, Natalie and Chastity, awesome representatives of the organization in the city, the region, the state, and nationally. Shannon mentioned the consulting staff. There's myself, very brief bio, 30 years almost with Alaska Fish and Game, 15, 16 years now as a senior management consultant for Kenai River Sportfishing Association. Over those years, I've been really lucky. I've got a trap line of hundreds of individuals that I can just pick up the phone and talk to, and it's very helpful. The other fishery management consultant, who's not a scientist, Reuben Hankey. Now, Reuben, when you see him, he might just go, hey, I'm just a fishing guide. Reuben has attended probably 150 meetings of the Alaska Board of Fisheries. He has nurtured relationships with probably the last 75 members who have served on that board, including the present board. I've got to tell you, I'm a biologist. I was with Fish and Game for close to 30 years. I retired as director of Sportfish. Reuben knows more about the fisheries in this state than anybody I've ever met. I mean, if you want to know about gooey ducks in Southeast or prawns in Prince William Sound or king crab, I mean, it's not just king salmon. Amazing asset. Ray Bemisdorfer, who works out of Oregon City, Oregon, is a notable fishery scientist and provides us with support. We have a government affairs committee. Many of you have met Eldon Mulder. He's on our board of directors as well, but he represents our interests in Juneau. So let me talk just a few minutes more here and then move on. But engagement. For our purposes, we define engagement as a level of involvement, commitment, connection between our organization and any of those stakeholders who also have a place at the table on fisheries issues. Again, back to our touchstone, king salmon, habitat, sport and personal use opportunities. So what have we accomplished? What can we say? Hey, you know, we worked on that and it moved the ball. Well, I'm most proud, because it's kind of what I do, in the regulatory development around the conservation of king salmon in the state. This last 30 years since the formation of the organization, we've been working on the Kenai. And of course, we also work with the Mat-Su Fish and Wildlife Commission on issues in the Northern Inlet. But as time went on, and especially since we're experiencing a decline in the number of king salmon across the entire state, we've began working with Chitina dip netters and the Copper River fishery. We've been down with the Southeast Alaska fishery this past year. We've got proposals in to try to provide more king salmon on the spawning ground in the Nushagak River. That'll come up this winter. So king salmon, that's what I'm most proud of. But it became really obvious to us here on the Kenai way back at the beginning that there were some things that were going to have to be prioritized if we were going to sustain the fishery. And it's a challenge. I mean, we knew that we had to prioritize habitat conservation, which included bank angling and how we boat. And Yamaha was a phenomenal partner then and now in developing strategies to reduce boat wakes and emissions. And we thank them. We thank them for sponsoring this event in part. We knew we needed to regulate the professional guide or industry. It was rapidly expanding back in the 70s and 80s. Shannon's predecessors and other people from CRISA have worked with others to form the Guide Academy. And although because of constitutional constraints, we can't put a ceiling on the number of guides, we can sure raise the bar and create a level of professionalism, and that's what we have sought. We were instrumental. We had a place at the table when the personal use fishery was converted from a fishery that was only open to the public after the upper limit of the escapement goal for sockeye salmon was projected or achieved, to a fishery now that has a regular season, regular bag limits, and the chance to expand when the resource will allow. And I can tell you personally, I had a place at that table when that regulation was passed. We also have interacted with the department day in and day out. Ray, our scientist, establishing escapement goals and understanding the science that they do, because science has uncertainty associated with it. And if you don't understand that uncertainty, you're just going to make poor decisions. The other example, and there's a couple individuals in the crowd here who I'd like to acknowledge, and that is we came to the realization that we were going to have to work with the upper sub-district set net fishery to develop selective harvest strategies. I'm going to talk more about this in the king salmon presentation, but we've got the Gabriels and Gary Hollier here, or set netters, and they've worked hard, and their heart's been in the right place to develop selective harvest strategies to put more kings in the river and still have a chance to run a business on sockeye. Well, about the rest of the meeting here, we're going to have a video presentation from Senator Sullivan, who's going to be here tonight. We appreciate that. Then following Senator Sullivan, we're going to have 3 panels, and one on king salmon, one on the state's private nonprofit hatchery system, and one on fisheries and government. Now, what Shannon and I tried to do here, and we hope it really pans out, is recognize that any of us could get on the computer, plug in some stuff, and have an AI prepared presentation delivered to us. Boom. That would satisfy some of your information needs. But what we've assembled here today in those panels are individuals who have been in the arena, if you remember that Teddy Roosevelt saying, and they're going to tell the stories of their experiences and relate the data as they do that. And so I'm expecting dialogue, conversations. We're going to be soft moderators. These are the people that have had either had or have their hands on the controls. And it's a privilege to have assembled this group. So with that, we're going to go to Senator Sullivan. And after that, we'll assemble the first panel up here and talk about king salmon. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much.
Hello, Alaska. Hello, Kenai. And thank you for allowing me to say a few words at another great Kenai River Sportfishing Association, CRISA Roundtable. Shannon, you and your whole team are doing such a great job. First, I just want to say I'm really sorry I am not there. So thanks for letting me be able to say a few words by video. I think you guys know, I think I've made almost every single one of these roundtables, which I love and I learned so much from in my tenure in the United States Senate. This is pre-recorded, obviously. Right now, I am very likely to be on Adak Island with some top generals and admirals looking at reopening the Adak facility for a U.S. Navy base. This is something I've been working on for a long time. We got money in the one big beautiful bill. So that is the only reason that I would not be at the round table again. By the way, I do plan on getting up to the Kenai tonight. Sometime I will be fishing, I hope, at 5 a.m. with so many of you. Some of you might remember I came in second a couple of years ago, had the best boat. So don't count me out. I'm going to be there. I'm planning on being there, assuming we have good weather. But this is such an important event, such a great event. And I certainly plan on being with all of you guys tomorrow morning. I was just on the Kenai last weekend. Holy camoli, the reds were coming in. You couldn't keep the fish off the line. So it's so great that we're having a strong sockeye run. I don't have to tell all of you because you epitomize it. Fishing is the lifeblood of our state. It's in our DNA. We became a state in large part to manage our fish, and I would say we do a really good job at it. You know, when I joined the Senate 10 years ago, if you can believe that, I said, I got to be on the Commerce Committee. I told our leadership that. A little tough. I was ranked 100 out of 100, so I had no idea if I was going to get on it. Got on the Commerce Committee. I always tell my colleagues there, we, Alaska, are the superpower of seafood for so many reasons: sport, commercial, subsistence. And I'm also on the Environment and Public Works Committee that has jurisdiction over the Fish and Wildlife Service, and am now the chairman of the subcommittee on the Coast Guard, Maritime, and Fisheries, which has jurisdiction over NOAA. So my team and I are focused on fisheries issues literally every day from these different perches in the United States Senate. So first of all, a couple things that we're working on I really want to go through because there's so many issues, some opportunities, some challenges, always challenges. You know, our fishing issues can be contentious. And I think what unifies us is that we all want strong runs. We all want access to our beautiful lands. We want sustainable fisheries for the next generation. We want strong salmon runs across the state. I'm going to get into that. Those are the things that unify us. Those are the things that I'm focused on back in DC. We've been working closely with the new administration. Some of you may have seen the president's executive order on restoring American seafood competitiveness. This EO provides several direct pathways to further support Alaska and our fisheries and all of you. The EO directs NOAA and the federal government to reduce regulatory burdens and improve data collections to support our fisheries, sport and commercial and subsistence. So this this EO applies to recreational and sport fishing, as well as other things that we're working on with regard to NOAA. So let me go through some of the different legislation that we are working on. We've had challenges, there's no doubt about it. And I wanted to give you an update on some of the legislative work that we're doing because fishing policy can be contentious. I know we're going to have a good discussion on that. Some of my team is going to be there. But like I said, there's so many things from my perspective that unite us versus dividing us. And one of those, of course, is access. The other one is very much a focus on Chris and so many Alaskans, and that's the huge variability of our salmon runs. Like I said, last weekend on the Kenai, when I was there, incredible strong sockeye run. Bristol Bay's having another incredible strong sockeye run. However, different parts of the state aren't faring that well at all. I've talked about my wife, Julie, my incredible wife, Julie. Her family's had a fish camp on the Yukon, fishing primarily for kings that her family has fished for thousands of years. I've been going to that camp now, going on almost 40 years, if you can believe that. And that fishery, that even subsistence in the Middle River, the Yukon, where Julie's our family's fish camp is, has had a 7-year shutdown, even subsistence harvests. As you can imagine, this is devastating to so many Alaskans. Certainly my wife's family, we have not been able to teach our girls some of the native heritage and culture that is so important to my wife and her family. So this is way beyond food security. We still go up to the fish camp every summer. We're there over the July 4th weekend, but there was no fishing again. So what is going on with regard to this giant variability in our salmon runs? I think that everybody has a similar goal. Last year, I talked to you guys about my legislation, the Alaska Salmon Research Task Force Act. By the way, strong input from my wife saying, hey, Dan, come on, we got to figure all this out for our great state. What is causing the variability that we're seeing? Really strong runs with certain salmon species in parts of our state, and then king runs on the Yukon or the Kuskokwim or the Kenai, or in Southeast have been really, really bad. So we got this bill passed. The goal was to bring the best minds together, federal, NOAA, state, indigenous, native, university, the best minds, literally the best experts in the country, to start looking at this big question. We passed the law, and inside of a year, they put out the first report. As some of you know, that's not always easy. Federal legislation and a top expert report inside of 2 years. We got that done. I urge you to take a look at it. I know I mentioned this last year. It just had come out last year. It's not perfect, but it's thoughtful. There was some skepticism when we proposed this bill and proposed this task force, but the goal was never anything political. It was what I think we all agree on, to find answers and solutions to this huge problem that we have and get to the goal of what we all want: strong, sustainable salmon runs in every part of the state with every species. So the legislation and the report, like I said, have some of the world's leading salmon researchers. I just talked to the top people at NOAA saying we're going to need your help on the follow-on. But there's recommendations on further research gaps, further collaboration on research to address issues like bycatch, and also looking at other changing environmental conditions, competition from hatchery fish, particularly in Russia and in Asia, and other ecosystem variables that are affecting salmon productivity in our state and across the world. So what are we doing now? We are working on legislation, and we're going to want your input that will build on the work of the Alaska Salmon Research Task Force Act and the study that came out to fill these research gaps, give our fishery managers the tools they need to appropriately address and assess concerns like bycatch and competition from hatchery fish. We think that this is an important next step. Again, getting to the goal that we all share as Alaskans: strong, sustainable salmon runs and fisheries across our state. The other thing we've done, and this roundtable is a great example of this, is we get feedback from the community on ideas, on research, but also on legislative ideas that we have tried and successfully taken to legislation and the follow through on legislation. Let me give you a couple examples of that. A couple years ago, our sportfish, our charter operators came up with a proposed idea that we put in legislation to allow recreational fishing sector to purchase halibut quota from commercial fisheries. So if commercial quotas weren't fully being used, why wouldn't sport fishers have access to that quota as well, funded by their own sector? It was a great idea. we were like, sounds simple. Let's put it into law. We got that passed. And last month, it took too long. NOAA Fisheries finally announced the final rule to fully implement the RQE recreational quota entity program, and they will begin collecting fees and issuing electronic charter halibut stamps in January. So, thank you. Great idea. Turned it into law. Finally got NOAA to put out the regs, but it's a great idea of how we can reduce conflict and support sustainable fishery management from all sectors with the experts like all of you at this roundtable. Next, a number of you raised concerns about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service trying to ban lead tackle in certain national wildlife refuges. And many Alaskans, as you all know, use lead tackle and lead ammo for subsistence hunting and fishing. The alternatives are not as effective and a lot more expensive. And we saw, and I think a lot of you saw, very little scientific justification for the ban. So I was one of the lead co-sponsors on Protecting Access for Hunters and Anglers Act to push back on this rule. We didn't get it passed last year, but we are fighting to make sure it gets reintroduced this year, and I'm looking forward to getting that over the goal line. Another area that we heard from so many in our fishing community on sport and commercial is on the important Saltonstall Kennedy program and funding, federal funding that comes from that. Well, what we heard was that the funding, where that funding was going, was directed completely by NOAA and EPA, the federal agencies, with very little support from our fishermen, from all of you. That was not the intention of the Saltonstall Kennedy program or act when it passed. So we put in a bill. It was called the American Fisheries Advisory Committee Act to make sure our fishermen, both sport and commercial fishing communities, would have the voice to say, hey, this is where these federal funds should be going. We got that one over the goal line. It is now law, and we want your input on where these dollars should be going. Local Alaskans, not the big bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., should be making these decisions. And I understand there's some concern about this committee's work continuing. Trust me, because we are so invested in this. We are working relentlessly to make sure NOAA and the Department of Commerce fund this and make sure that these federal funds are going to go in the places where all of you, not the big bureaucrats in DC, think we should do it. Another issue, I know it came up last roundtable, I'm sure it's likely to come up again, is this threat to our fisheries coming from some of these lower 48 activists. You might remember they tried to shut down our troll fishery in Southeast last year. We all kind of came together in terms of the king salmon fishery there, and we're able to get that stopped. Now they're at it again with a petition for Gulf of Alaska king salmon to be listed as threatened or endangered. We are working closely, continue to work closely with NOAA to make sure it has all the data it has to make a responsible decision here, including working with our great Alaska Department of Fish and Game to make this proper decision. I think we all know if this species becomes listed, there's a huge risk that we might not ever be able to fish for kings again. We don't want that. This is going to be very important. We're working on that very closely. Finally, a couple more things. I'm continuing to lead in the Senate on the implementation of the Save Our Seas 2.0 Act. That's my legislation. We had Save Our Seas 1, Save Our Seas 2.0. President Trump signed both of these. These are the Save Our Seas 2.0 was the most comprehensive ocean cleanup, ocean debris legislation in the history of the Congress. I'm proud of that. We are now implementing it fully with, importantly, a ocean marine debris foundation, a congressionally chartered foundation that I made sure was going to be set up in Alaska. It is. It's off and running. It can accept not just public, federal dollars, but private dollars. We want to make sure this Ocean Debris Foundation in our great state is going to be something that we can all be proud of and big and impactful. It's got great potential. It's down in Juneau, and I always try to highlight the great work that it's doing with the private sector and others to keep our oceans healthy, sustainable, and free from debris. And finally, I wanted to just let you know I'm going to be the lead senator introducing the Sport Fish Restoration and Boating Trust Fund Act in the Senate. This is legislation that would reauthorize a very successful program that has provided approximately $700 million in annual funding to help fishery restoration, boating access, and infrastructure for our sport fishermen across the country. You've all supplied the funding in many ways for this. Your purchases of fishing equipment, boat fuel, and other boating and fishing related equipment funds helps to boost fisheries conservation and improve access for sport fishing opportunities. That's what this legislation is all about. And I'm looking forward to moving that. I know it's a priority of many of yours in the Senate very soon. So I know I went on way too long. Thanks again. I know our fishing communities are made up of very different interests, but there are things that we can agree on. Sustainable oceans, healthy and robust salmon runs, and we don't want to be eating communist fish from China or Russia. We love our American freedom fish. Thanks again. Have a great conference, and thanks for all that our organizers and all of you at CRISA are doing day in and day out to help make sure we have beautiful, sustainable salmon runs for generations to come. See you tomorrow morning.
We thank Dan and his staff. Senator did a great job. It's nice to have that kind of support. And once again, I just want to reiterate this one word. It's kind of a common theme, and that's engagement. And you saw some real engagement there. Okay, so we're going to shuffle things around here a little bit to get the first panel up. It's kind of near and dear to my heart. We're going to talk about Alaska king salmon. Now, on that panel are Doug Vincent-Lang, Commissioner of Fish and Game, myself, I've already introduced, and Craig Medred, who's one of my very best friends and an excellent journalist. I'm trying to remember when we all got started and roughly added together, and we're getting older. It's about 150 years of hands-on experience in the fisheries of Alaska between the three of us. So Doug's going to start out and talk about whatever he wants to talk about, frankly, but I asked him to talk about kind of king salmon on the statewide level and set things in context and talk about some of the initiatives that the department is undertaking. And then I'm going to pick it up and talk about the history of king salmon fishing during my lifetime in the Upper Cook Inlet. And then Craig, who's been viewing this for a very long time as well, is going to say, again, basically anything he wants about king salmon, but he's been a critical thinker and observer of management, of research, of the conduct of the fisheries, for going on 50 years. So give us just a minute to sit down. Forgive us if it just sounds like a conversation instead of a staff report, and enjoy it, I hope. Thank you.
Hey, check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. You have to get close to these microphones if you want them to work. Be close to the microphones if you want them to be loud.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you. Well, hello everyone. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Doug Vincent.
It's got to be close.
Okay, I'm Doug Vincent-Lang. I'm the Commissioner for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. I'm glad you're all here. What an honor to speak in front of you. King salmon. So to me, Alaska's iconic fish. The name Kings kind of brings back its royalty in Alaska's fisheries, as also its importance. But I think we need to spend a little bit of time looking at the history of Alaska's fisheries before we go into king salmon. Just remember, at statehood, our salmon fisheries were decimated. We fought for statehood to get control of our salmon fisheries and to regain management as a state to rebuild those salmon runs and provide for our economy, our culture, our food security, our recreational activities, and our commercial fisheries. That was a hard-fought battle. We won it. As a result, we've rebuilt those runs. We've established really a world-class fish and game management agency. We've instituted a board of fish that ensures public input into our fishery management programs. We have spent a lot of time in working in partnership with other groups. We can't do this alone. We recognize it. But we have a partnership that ensures that we're going to rebuild these runs. And look, since statehood, there's no question about it. We've rebuilt our runs overall. We have some of the most vibrant commercial fisheries in the nation, in the world. And we're doing an excellent job. We have a sustainable fisheries management policy. We've instituted escapement-based management. We are doing the right things. Now, that's not to say every one of our fisheries is meeting every one of its escapement goals, but we are much better off having a state-managed fishery than we are having a federally managed fisheries moving forward. And finally, I want to credit our delegation. You heard Dan, all the efforts he's doing. Lisa's doing very similar efforts, and I know Nick Begich is in the background. He's working on Marine Mammal Protection Act issues. We couldn't do this without the support of our delegation. So I just want to make everybody know that we really support and really appreciate the partnerships that we're having and moving forward. So now let's get to king salmon. Kings have the longest life history of any of the salmon species in Alaska. You know, they spend 8 months in the gravel, 1 to 2 years in freshwater after they emerge, 3 to 6 years in the ocean, and then several months upon their return and getting into the spawning areas to spawn again and repeat the life cycle. All these life stages have incredible amount of susceptibility to environmental impacts. And because they're long-lived, the longer you live in those environments, the more susceptible you are to them. So, you know, while pink salmon and chum salmon can relatively respond quickly, king salmon take a little bit more time to respond. And juvenile, you know, we know that predation affects juvenile salmon. Look at the Kenai River. We now have some very vibrant rainbow trout populations as a result of the number of sockeye we're putting in there. We're trying to figure out and understand the impacts that those rainbow trout may be having on some of our juvenile Chinook salmon in terms of predation. We also know that seals are predating on our juveniles when they head out to sea, as well as on adults coming back. Warm temperatures are having an impact. King salmon, look at it, the Yukon River. Warm temperatures are clearly having an impact. These fish are cold-blooded. When they're going into the freshwater environment and they're having warmer temperatures, their energy demands go up and they're not eating. So it takes a lot more energy to get up to the Yukon border, the Canadian border, and they just simply don't have that energy to make it up. Disease is having a huge impact. We found out that in the Kenai River, in the Yukon River, Ichthyophonus is killing a large proportion of our fish that are between Pilot Station and the Yukon border. So again, that's an impact that's much more prevalent in longer river systems than it is in shorter river systems. And habitat, you know, we're trying to restore habitat on this Kenai River. For instance, we heard concerns many years ago about bank angling. So we've instituted a riparian management plan, but habitat clearly has an impact. And in some areas of our transboundary rivers, we're seeing a lot of mining in Canada, and we're working with Canada to try to minimize some of those impacts. And then floods, you know, you got gravel in the, you got eggs in the gravel, and you have a fall flood event, that can have an impact. Adult marine impacts include predation by marine mammals, competition in the ocean with hatchery fish. We've heard that loud and clear. We're going to have a panel on that to just talk about that. Bycatch and intercept. You know, everybody is, I think, I've never seen the amount of concern over bycatch and intercept that we currently have. But we're taking steps through the North Pacific Fishery Management Council to address that, and through the Board of Fisheries. We took steps in Area M to reduce the chum salmon intercept for the Yukon, and we have very strong controls on king salmon intercept in our trawl fisheries, both in the Bering Sea and in the Gulf of Alaska. And then directed harvest. We're still harvesting. So everybody thinks king salmon are in trouble. We're still harvesting 400 to 500,000 king salmon in the state of Alaska. You know, if these things were clearly at the risk of extinction, we would not be harvesting 500,000 of these fish. A lot of these fish are harvested in Southeast Alaska fisheries, or they're treaty fisheries shared with Canada in the lower 48, and it's strictly controlled, but our fair share is considered about 200,000 fish in round numbers. And most of our fish are caught in marine intercept fisheries. As we've seen a lot of these declines, we've taken very proactive steps in directed fisheries in river to try to ensure our escapement goals. But this last year, we've taken steps to reduce our marine harvest of those fisheries. I think I got a lot of complaints when I took steps to reduce the marine sport harvest during the summer months, but those are fisheries those fish are heading to our streams, and it's time to put them into the spawning bed. So we took a measure to reduce that harvest in an attempt to meet our escapement goals. And I think that's the most critical piece. We manage for escapement goals. That's different than the way the federal government manage. We manage to ensure that we're putting enough fish in the spawning beds to maximize the return of those fish. That's the other aspect of escapement goal management. We manage to maximize the yield. It doesn't mean if we're not meeting escapement goal that these things are at risk of extinction. We're trying to get them back to a high level of productivity. Thus, we were very opposed to the proposed listing of king salmon in the state of Alaska. Simply because we're not meeting escapement goal does not mean these things are at risk of extinction. They just basically mean that we're trying to rebuild them up to high levels of yield to provide for those economic opportunities, those cultural opportunities, and everything else. And I think overall, our management is working. Let's take a look at where we are this year. Southeast Alaska, 3-4 years ago, we were meeting 20% of our escapement goals. This year, we're on track to meet almost every one of them. Copper River, we're on goal to meet our escapement goal there. There's a little question about how we're counting, but right now, I think our sonar count gave us 28,000 kings into that river system. Kenai River, the early run exceeded the preseason forecast, did not meet the escapement goal, but it's on a trending upward direction. Late run, let's all have a hand over clock. We met our late run recovery goal, 14,250. That should be applauded. Our management is working to rebuild this run. We met the Chickneck goal. That goal had not been met for years. We met that goal this year. North Alaska Peninsula, we met those goals. The Nushyak, it appears that we're on track to meet the Nushyak king salmon goal. And we met our king salmon goals in the Kuskokwim River. We're not doing as well in the northern Cook Inlet yet. We're still trying to figure out what's happening there, but we know we have some predation with pike in that system, and we're also struggling with some of these systems that have warm water like the Desha. Kodiak, we still don't know what's happening in Kodiak. We have pretty low runs coming to the Karlik and Iakulik, which was interesting because we met the Chickneck escapement goal, but why the Karlik and Iakulik are suffering, we don't know. Again, we think that might be temperature related. And then I think you heard Senator Sullivan talk about it, the Yukon. Yukon is a long river system. Fish are suffering because of disease, ichthyophonus. We know that. We also know that they have a long way to go up that river system. Warm temperatures is affecting them. And we also understand that there are many other factors that, including habitat in Canada, that's of concern to us. We're trying to piece that puzzle together, but it's not a clear puzzle, and it's not a really easy puzzle to solve. We know, I'll tell you one thing, we know it's not bycatch. Let's take chum for an example up there this year. We were projecting to get 900,000 chums back. We got about 300,000 back. We're missing 600,000. Area M harvested maybe 200,000 chums. 70% of those were Asian chums. So we're talking about 40,000 chums that are going to go all the way up and down the entire Bristol Bay drainage, from Bristol Bay all the way up to Norton Sound. So maybe 20,000 Yukon chums. That's not the explanation of why we're missing 700,000 chums. We know those numbers really well too, and it just doesn't add up into those numbers. So we're trying to piece those puzzles together, and it's hard, but we're not going to give up on the Yukon, but it's going to be a long recovery. Then finally, I'm just going to end a little bit with what are we doing as a state? As I said, we're reducing directed harvest. You know, that's the one thing we can control very easily. I know it hurts everybody. Nothing harder in my job than to reduce opportunity for people to go out and go fish. But sometimes it's necessary to ensure sustainability. We're reducing bycatch and intercept at the council level and at the board level. We're studying marine factors. When I came in as commissioner, we really had a pretty good understanding of what was happening in freshwater environments, but we really didn't have any idea what was happening in that nearshore marine environment when fish were going out to sea. We instituted a marine science program. It's now a cement program in our department, and it's starting to yield some very good answers as to what's happening in that marine environment when they first go out to sea. We started juvenile studies. In the Columbia River, they have these little tags they put in juvenile salmon, and then they can pick them up where they're moving around in river as well as downriver. We've started that in the Kenai River, and we have 1 year now underneath our belt, and it's going to hopefully answer questions as to what's affecting juvenile mortality rates. Predation impacts, we're looking at that. We have some studies, and we're working with other people to follow their studies about the marine impacts and salmon predation from salmon sharks to marine mammals. We know it's a huge impact. The number of marine mammals in the ocean over the last decade has probably more than doubled, if not tripled. That's got to be having an impact on long-lived species like king salmon in the marine environment. We're updating our escapement goals. We routinely update our escapement goals every board cycle, and hopefully that's reflective of differences in size at age, because we know that affects long-term productivity. And we're evaluating hatchery impacts. I know you got a panel on that, but we are actively involving in looking at the impacts of straying as well as food competition on our salmon. And then we're finally, I think Kevin mentioned it, we're working with people like the Gabriels to look at ways we can still have commercial fishing for other species while minimizing the impact on stocks of concern like king salmon with seine gear operations and other types of gear. And then finally, one other thing I'll mention regarding Senator Sullivan's remarks is we know it's going to be a long road to recovery for king salmon in the Yukon River. And as part of a negotiation with Canada, we're trying to rebuild their runs up into Canada. But we recognize that would, if we just completely cut off harvest opportunity in the lower river, that would have huge impacts on culture. So this year we did something kind of unique. We instituted a cultural permit in that river so that people can still harvest a very small number of fish to preserve that opportunity to pass on culture and subsistence opportunity. It's not food security, but it's passing on culture so that when those stocks are rebuilt, we haven't lost those cultural connections. So bottom line, things are starting to look up for king salmon. It's going to be a road. Sometimes I wish I was Elon Musk. Had a rocket, just fired up into space, and 2 weeks later, you can fire another one up because he figured out what was wrong. But it takes about 7 or 14 years to figure out whether what you're doing with king salmon works. So it's going to take time. I urge you guys patience, but we're on a right track and we're on a positive track. So thank you.
Hey, Doug. Yeah. So I'm going to get up next and do my thing, but a couple things about Doug that you should know other than he's one of my best friends as well. The average tenure of a commissioner, some states they call him director, in the United States is less than 3 years. Doug's going on 7. Doug's program is larger than probably any in the country besides maybe California. So, I mean, we owe him a debt of gratitude for that. The other thing, back in the 90s when Doug worked in the Sportfish division and I was director, the issue of bank angling and boat wake degradation was very important on the Kenai River. And at that time, in a Alaska Board of Fisheries meeting, the board was on the cusp of closing bank angling, and they turned to us, Doug was there with me at that time, and said, well, what do you think you can do? And I looked over at the commissioner at that time, who was kind of in a quandary, and I turned and looked at the Board of Fish and I said, I think we can reorganize so we can put about $200,000 into a study on bank angling and probably come up with some recommendations for closed areas. The guy over here did that right on the fly, picked up the ball, ran with it, wrote the report, wrote the proposal that became the habitat management plan, that guy. So as I said when I was starting out, we're really getting a chance to look at some of the folks that have had their hands on the controls and done the work over the years. And I thank everybody for that. Craig, do you have any comments?
Yeah, you just stole the good thing I was going to say, since, you know, they always, the old saying about reporters is they show up after disaster to shoot the survivors. I was going to mention the bank habitat, that people here weren't here in the 80s. It's a different river. I mean, it was scoured bank to bank. There was an enormous amount of rearing habitat lost. And that river is in so much better shape today that he deserves credit. Kenai Sport Fishing, who put a lot of effort into that, deserves credit. So I just thought I would throw in a good word there.
All right. Well, I'm going to get up and hopefully not bore you with a story of Cook Inlet. All right. I'm going to tighten this thing up. Okay. The story I'm going to tell today doesn't go back to prehistoric times, but it starts on the year I was born, 1951. In 1951 and again in 1952, between 150 and 175,000 king salmon were harvested each of those years in Upper Cook Inlet. There were about 600 commercial drift gill net boats out. There were set nets out, and it was before statehood, so we still had traps. One of the statistics that just boggles my mind is there were 174,912 kings killed harvested in 1952. I mean, the precision that it just, strikes me as kind of odd. But after that, harvests fell. They fell precipitously. And although the assessment program that the federal government operated was really weak at the time, it was pretty obvious that we were failing to put enough fish on the spawning ground. Situations, experiences like that are what led the state to do in the future what Doug talked at length about, and that's escapement goal management. Fish traps were closed, and we got statehood in 1959. Once we got management, we started to look at things we could do to improve the sustainability of king salmon. The set net fishery started out about May 25th, pre-statehood, gradually backed off to June 25th. During that early season, commercial fishermen were allowed to use 8.5-inch mesh gear, which was selective for king salmon. The gear changed over time to what it is today, mostly red salmon gear. Through the 1950s then and the 1960s and in the early 1970s, runs were low, escapements were minimal. There were some other things going on during that time. The birth of the sport fishery. In 1951, the road from Anchorage to Sterling was fixed up or was opened. The Alaska Railroad provided access to some of the Susitna streams, like Willow, Montana Creek. Very limited fishing opportunity for king salmon existed during those years. The sport fishery, it was mainly weekend only. It was below the railroad tracks up north. Same kind of thing on the lower streams. The Kenai was kind of a mystery because it was occluded and you really didn't have a good feel for it. Then I'm going to go first through a little bit in the valley and then come back to the Kenai, so I'm not going to be just jumping around. Up in the Mat-Su Valley, there were low escapements. I was scuba diving in Kodiak in the early 70s and came over to Cook Inlet about 75. So the count in the Deshka River, I'm going to use that as an example. was about 5,000 fish in 74 and 75. And then I started counting, and it's not because I have good eyes, I'm just lucky. But in 1976, we went from the 5,000, give or take, in 73, 74, 75 to 25,000. And then in 76, 77, it got up to about 40,000. And I started flying, it was an old Bell 47, you know, and I'd come back in and I'd tell my superiors, hey, I saw 25,000 fish out there. And they wouldn't believe me. In fact, the first year we came back and did that, they went out and recounted and came back with like 27,000. We put a weir in the Deshka River. When I say we, Alaska Fish and Game. And we found that what we were seeing out of the helicopter was about half of what was there. And in 2004, 60,000 fish went through the weir. Things started to kind of taper off about 2008, down to about 15,000, to by 2020, 2024, they were down to the 3,000 to 5,000 again. And this year we saw 1,600. So we've seen variation between 1,600 and 60,000. And as Doug pointed out, we've got some issues there. We don't understand what's going on, and we got a lot of work to do. Meanwhile, on the Kenai, of course, glacial water, you couldn't fly over and see fish other than in the early run up in the tributaries. So yeah, we knew there were fish in the Kenai River system and the Funny River system and up by Cooper Landing. And they were fish that moved into the fresh water in late May and June. And of course, they had kind of a free rein to go in because the set net fishery had been backed off till the end of June. Then, you know, during the late or mid 1970s, again, I'm going to jump around a little bit here because the sport fishery changed dramatically in the Kenai. People learned to fish out of a boat, drifting back, bouncing and such. And harvests went up. We learned a lot more. The management strategy during those years was sort of a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 management strategy. The set nets took about 1/3, maybe 10,000 up to 20,000, that range. And the sport fishery did the same. And we thought that because we knew about what the exploitation rate was on sockeye, it was maybe about the same on kings. And so if you got 20, 20, and 20, you had a run of about 60,000. In the late 1980s, the department worked with some folks out of the Navy to develop a sonar unit that would allow them to distinguish between kings and sockeyes and start to count the kings. So we got counts in 3 years there in the late 80s and took that information to the Board of Fisheries. And those runs averaged about 45,000 kings of all sizes. And so we looked at literature that said in good conditions, in the freshwater, average conditions, in the marine environment, you get maybe 3 to 1 back. So the Board of Fisheries at that time said, well, 45 is the average, 15,000 is 3 to 1, what we need to get at least that average. And so they set up an escapement goal of 15 to 30,000, hoping to optimize future runs, but to protect the bottom end. And over the years, the sonar has moved from lower in the river to higher up in the river. The technology has gone from split beam to dual beam to these Aries things. I remember back in the first iteration, there was a sonar technician named Paul Skavorik. And Paul was so proud of his work. He said, I can not only tell you how big that king is, I can tell you if it's a male or female, and I know what direction it's moving. And we bought into that and found out that probably what the sonar was giving us is an approximation that was, you know, a low number of fish that day, a medium number of fish, a high number of fish. But it's an exceptional program. It's I can't even explain how exceptional that is. Okay, I'm going to shuffle my cards here for a minute so that I get back on track. Runs in the Kenai remained robust through the late 70s, the 80s, and early 90s. As I said, somewhere around 50,000 would be a good average for that 30-year period of time. we worked hard with the Board of Fish to develop management plans that utilize that technology. Frankly, looking back, I think we were over-engineering things a bit, but in the late 1980s, the decision was made that there was basically a three-piece to the management plans. There was going to be a green zone where, Katie barred the door, we were going to kill fish, and we did. There was a narrow orange zone where if we started to get worried, we'd tap down on things. We'd prohibit bait or go catch and release in the river, and we'd restrict some time out in the commercial fishery. That only happened once that I can remember, maybe twice, and it really raised an uproar because we had been living high on the hog. None of us in those late 80s believed that we would ever see the kind of closures we've had for the last 5 years here. So in 2012, that was the disaster year. It was the first year where we brought everything to a complete halt. And then we looked at each other and said, what do we do now? And the Board of Fisheries formed a task force that I was privileged to be on. And out of that task force came a management strategy that really worked in that orange zone about pairing restrictions between the sport fishery and the commercial fishery. And those are painful and they've been troublesome, but they essentially work to put adequate numbers of fish on the spawning ground until this last period of time where we failed to meet our spawning escapement objective 3 years out of 4 or whatever it was. And the Board of Fisheries was obligated to designate late run Kenai king salmon as a stock of concern. So that stock of concern plan, we put a lot of work into that. We really looked hard at selective harvest strategies, and there's a lot of work to be done there. Catch and release, restricting bait, time and area, depth of nets, fishing on tides. I'm not going to go into all the detail. I just want to say that a tremendous amount of work and time have been put into this. This whole decline in king salmon and managing around low abundance is not taken lightly. I want to reiterate what Doug says. We're really proud of our management program, and we're not afraid to close fisheries, but we don't want to. Where do we go from here? I think on these early runs, it's simple. I mean, there's not a real competitive thing other than maybe some marine conditions. We got to put every fish we can on the spawning ground. We've got to protect the habitat. The late runs were here in the Kenai or on the Copper River or on Nushagak that happen at the same time as a really viable commercial fishery. There's a lot of work to be done. A lot of engagement has to occur. We have to develop selective harvest strategies. We have to manage to protect our habitat. We got to put as many fish on the spawning ground. And I think we got to kind of change the way we look at king salmon. It's great. We're still killing 500,000 of them and feeding America. But, the ones that get in a place like the Kenai River, they have to be very gently handled. And we got to make that escapement goal, and we got to hope open ocean conditions improve. So I'm expecting minor increases in abundance over time, but with what we've got going in the ocean, I don't see us having a inflection point like the mid 70s ever again. I'm positive of one thing, and that's that left to our own devices, that's Alaska Fish and Game, Alaska Board of the Fisheries, and Alaskan fishermen, we're going to bite the bullet and put fish on the spawning ground. So thanks. Doug or Craig got any questions for me? I'll try to handle them, but otherwise I'd like to hear Craig's critical thinking.
Well, I'm not going to go back to 1951. That's true. It was a year later. I think so. I agree with most of what you said, and I am going to say something else nice about the department before I, start shooting survivors. When I got back to Alaska in the 1970s, was not long after the department closed the mixed stock fishery in Icy Strait, and which almost got some biologists killed, and shutting down the set netters here, which was not pretty, which was necessary, is probably the bravest thing I've seen the department do since then. So nobody liked it. I didn't like it. They didn't like it, but it was the right thing to do. I think we have a bigger problem than just what fisheries biologists have focused on for decades, which is in-river issues. We've always worried about them. We worry about floods. We worry about warm water. We worry about all of that. We clearly have some marine problems. We may have some marine problems in Cook Inlet, which certainly has some carrying capacity. And we have a lot of fish, a lot of young fish going into Cook Inlet now from the Kenai, the Casila, a couple of big years of pinks in the Kenai. Do they compete with those north end fish, and do they have an advantage, and does that influence what happened this year in the Deshka? I don't know, but it'd be interesting to start to find out. As for kings themselves, I pulled up some data the other night. When I came back to Juneau in 1977 to work for the Empire, there was a guy named Howie Ryder who caught a 93-pound king salmon down at Kelp Bay on Baranof Island, which was then the world record. The average size of a commercially caught king, which gives some kind of bar of how big kings were, in those years was 19.52 pounds. It started to slip after that. When Les Anderson caught his fish, which was 97.4 and knocked Howie out of the rider slot, that was down to, let me see, 18.69, which is not bad, and it held that way for a few years. In fact, for quite a few years. By 2007, average had fallen to 15.25. A decade later, it was down to 12.1. And last year, it was 10.1. Something is happening clearly in the ocean that we're not getting the big fish we used to get back. We've become very good at producing low value salmon, i.e. pinks, to some degree chums, but we've somehow lost the most important fish to us. And I think there's a whole lot of discussion to go on there as to whether, and maybe we're stuck with it. It may be climate. I mean, there clearly is an advantage to warmer water for pink salmon. And we may have to live with this. We may never see again what we saw on the Kenai. And for those of you who missed it, well, I spent a morning on the Kenai, I think it was in the late 80s, with the late Bob Penny and the late Russ Reddick, who was regional sportfish supervisor at that time. When we started real early, because Bob Penny was like get out of bed at 4 a.m., we're going to fish hard kind of guy. And we were back bouncing, which was then legal. And I don't think from then until about 11 o'clock, there was a time someone didn't have a fish on. And we were releasing 40, 50, and one that probably would have gone 70-pound kings because we're after that 100-pound fish. And we quit at 11 exhausted. And it's just amazing to me how good it was then and where we are now. It's just, I don't think we're ever going to get that back. I don't think the ocean's going to allow that. But the question is whether we can make it better. And Kevin, you want to weigh in there?
Yeah, thank you, Craig. And, those of us that were out in the field, I was working in the Susitna drainage almost exclusively during that time. Deshka, Alexander, Talshalitna, up in the Talkeetna drainage. I would just reiterate what Craig said. I had 20, 30 fish days. But that brings me back to where I stopped before. Even if we get fish back, do we want to just be that cavalier? Do we want to, count success by the number of fish we hooked and released? And hook and release mortality, if you're careful, might be, between 5 and 10%. If you're sloppy, it's probably a lot more than that. But that's not the subject. The subject is just, are we at an inflection point here where we have to rework things a bit and look at less harvest-oriented fisheries in river, more selective harvest in our commercial fisheries. And there's other things too. We've experienced this year probably the best fishing for sockeye salmon you're ever going to have in any river. Don't count on that happening again. But, the public is now very aware of sockeye salmon availability, and they're, hooked on it, no pun intended. So, that genie's probably not going back in the box. But there's just, in my estimation, we're sort of at an inflection point where these discussions that were difficult to have in the past just have to be had.
So I think it's clear something's happening in the ocean. King salmon are coming back smaller at age and younger at age.
Mhm.
So younger at age means that we're not seeing those 7, 6-year-old fish coming back. We're seeing 4 and 5-year-old fish come back, and they're coming back smaller. So if you're a king salmon living out in the ocean, you don't want to be out there because you're coming back younger and you're coming back earlier. So why is that? Well, we know salmon are cold-blooded. So when you're out in the ocean and you're swimming around as a king salmon, spending 3, 4, 5 years out there, it's as the temperature warms, your energy demands go on. You're on a treadmill out there. And if the ocean as a warmer temperature has a different kind of diet makeup or different kind of food sources out there that's not as nutritious as it was when it's colder, you're on a treadmill eating less nutritious fish. So you're losing weight. So it's not a good place to be. So you come back early and you come back younger. Is that food competition from pinks and chum? Is it food competition from the number of sockeye we're putting out there? We don't know. Honestly, we don't know. We know the number of fish that Alaska's putting in the water is pretty immaterial compared to the number of fish that are being put in the water from other jurisdictions. And we have data on those biomass estimates. So we don't suspect that it's really our fish that are causing major hatchery impacts out there. But we don't know why these fish are out there. We know that sockeye are benefiting from environmental change. We know that they're lake oriented. Bristol Bay, we're putting more fish in those lakes. Those lakes are becoming more productive. They can have higher rearing capacity. You can't tell me when we got 70 million sockeye back into the Bristol Bay system a couple of years ago, to get that number of fish back, we put out 1.8 billion sockeye smolt, about this big, into the Bering Sea ecosystem in a period of time, April and May, probably a little bit of March too. That's the time when crab larvae are in the Bristol Bay watershed. I mean, in the Bristol Bay marine environment in a larval stage. That's a stage when we have king salmon going out and chum salmon going out. And these are big fish. Sockeye are winning a climate battle out there. The impact that's having on king salmon, we don't know yet. But
Russian pink salmon are doing pretty well out there too.
So we have a pretty good understanding what's happening in freshwater environments, especially as we're starting to add our knowledge with juvenile salmon. We have a lot to learn out in that marine environment, and we're not giving up on it, but a lot of that is beyond our jurisdiction. We had the International Year of the Salmon that added some incredible insights. We found out that we didn't have a significant overlap in where we found king salmon and pink and chum salmon, which was kind of interesting. But we really, the number of king salmon is relatively small compared to those other numbers, but we didn't see significant overlap, which taught us. But that was a snapshot of one, maybe half a year that we really learned something. We need to continue those kinds of big marine surveys, but they're not something we as a department can do because we don't have those big vessels out there. We need those NOAA vessels out in those deep water areas doing those surveys because we can't glean any information without surveys. So, yeah, environmental change is changing things.
There's a ton of things that would be nice to know, whether those fish, use the same areas year after year, whether it moves around based on water temperatures. I mean, it's a big puzzle.
Craig, I got a question for you. You've left yourself open, whether you were at the Alaska Daily News, the Dispatch, or now on your own, inviting people to call you and give you harass you, give you their opinion. What have you noticed over the years? Has it changed? How's the tenor? Just tell us about that if you can.
I think more people have come to offer opinions with less information. And I think it may be a reflection of social media that people who used to call me were pretty knowledgeable and upset that something was wrong, and they were often right. I mean, you boil things down and it gets messed up and it just isn't quite right. And now it's just, I think a lot of what your new sport fish director was talking about was people are just mad because they didn't get their fish. Something's wrong because I didn't get what I wanted. And I, I think that's kind of a social construct that is across the board of people. I mean, I don't want to use this word, but I will. They're just more selfish about everything.
Well, we've been friends since the late 70s, and I've probably followed your writing as close as anybody. And I think you have been able to keep a really good finger on the pulse of what's going on over those years, and thank you for that.
Well, I hope I did.
We're going to close it here, kind of where we opened it. There's a Pink Floyd song called I Wish You Were Here. There's a line out of that I particularly love. It's lost souls swimming in a fish bowl. You're looking at 3 of them. We're going to take a minute or two, go get some more to eat, and we're going to put the hatchery panel up. Okay, if you want to all take your seats, we're going to go into panel number 2. Panel number 2 is going to be a discussion of our state's private nonprofit hatchery system, its challenges, its opportunities, and so what we have here from this side to that side, they're going to give just a brief bio, but Steve here, Reifenstahl, the Northern Southeast Regional Aquaculture Organization for 40 years and consulting for about 5 now since then. A guy I kind of hope to meet over the years because we're both sort of goofy athletes or adult athletes, but then Craig Medred, again, journalist, critical thinker. We've got Bill Templin, who's the chief fisheries scientist for Commercial Fish Division from Alaska Fish and Game, and Larry Phillips, who's the policy director for the Pacific Northwest wing of the American Sportfish Association. He'll go last, listen to the conversation, and then maybe offer some things that he has learned, that they've learned in the Pacific Northwest that can help inform our future. I'm going to go down, I'm moderating, but I'm pretty sure these adults can get along without me, and start with Steve, go to Bill, Craig will pipe in as he does, and then Larry will finish it up.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it, Kevin. Kevin said that I should only speak for 10 minutes. I'm going to try to shorten that to 5. And he also said to give a little bio. So I've been very fortunate that I've had two careers, both spanning about 50 years now. One is a scientist, biologist, and another as an athlete. Almost all of it in Alaska. Been across every mountain range, done thousands of miles of ocean kayaking, and spent a lot of time in salmon streams. So I'm going to try to give you an idea of what the state's program, the Salmon Enhancement Program, is all about. And I expect that not many of you know a lot about it. And I'd like you to come away with 3 things that you might remember. One is that the total economic output of the Salmon Enhancement Program in Alaska is about $500 million. And the economic benefit to sport fishermen, sport charter, is pretty significant. We don't count that value, but the gist of it is the sports catch about 15,000 Chinook salmon every year from those programs, about 40,000 sockeye from those programs, and about 90,000 coho from those programs. And the other part is that fishermen, commercial fishermen, pay for those programs in total. So there's no cost to the state, there's no cost to the users that do catch those fish. So I'll go into some of the detail. The program started in the 1970s. You heard the commissioner mention that the state fisheries were in the toilet. They're at the historical lows in the mid 70s, early 70s, and the state responded to that. So one of the things was strict management to be able to get fish into the stream so we could have spawners that were going to reproduce. The other part was to start the enhancement program, which was called the FRED division, part of the Department of Fish and Game. That had about a $14 million budget. They built numerous hatcheries across the state. And then about 4 years later, new legislation came to be that initiated the enhancement program for the private nonprofit sector. It created that sector. That sector was paid for by fishermen. They taxed themselves 1% to 3%, depending on the region of the state. That money came in, and those became the operational costs. I think that one of the things that is really unique about this program is that I think most people out here are probably business people, certainly fisher people, but private nonprofits were able to operate these facilities that used to be operated by Fish and Game at a much reduced cost and a much higher efficiency. The return on investment to fishermen that are paying these bills is about 6 to 7 to 1. That's the benefit to cost. That's unheard of. And so that's why I've been very proud to work in this program for over 40 years, because it's similar to what you read about in Silicon Valley. It was a startup in the mid 70s. We worked 7 days a week, many hours to get these programs off the ground. There was always something more to do. And we built these fairly quickly from the 70s to the late 80s. And then they've kind of, from about 1990, there hasn't been any great changes in those programs. The production's about the same. In 1988, the state decided it was just too expensive, or they wanted to trim the budget. So they cut the FRED division, which saved the department about $14 million a year. And those programs could be operated by the private nonprofits if they chose to. That was up to them. In 1988, I signed a contract with the state to operate one of those facilities in Southeast Alaska. And I think one of the main things that I wanted to reinforce, and one of the things I'm hoping you will take home, is that in Southeast, the support by sportsmen, they're actually on the board of directors of these nonprofits, but they share in the Chinook, sockeye, and coho that return, and the sport charter lodges have built up around some of these programs because of the ability to have fish nearby their lodge and be able to harvest those fish. And so they have a business model that works very well there. Valdez does a similar thing. I don't know about the lodges in the Valdez Arm, but some 200,000 coho are caught in that area. Let's see, the sockeye facility at Main Bay and Prince William Sound is also used by many people in the Anchorage Bowl. I guess one thing I'd like to say about research, and the commissioner hit on this, and Senator Sullivan did as well, is that this salmon research initiative, I was part of that. I was asked to be on that panel, and we did that work that resulted in a report in about 12 months. And I was heartened to hear the senator say that they're looking at money, because the report's very nice. It does point out where some of the gaps are and what we need further research on. But if we don't have money, we can't really get to the answer to that. Another aspect of research, what I think that Bill may be talking about, is that in 2011, I was involved with 2 other people. We went to the commissioner and we believed we needed to do research on the straying issue, which we're going to talk more about later. And we were able to get $4 million through the legislature in 2011 to initiate this program. And the total cost of that project was about $22 million, not counting the in-kind contribution that Fish and Game makes, which probably puts it at more like $30 million over that 13-year period. And we're getting to the close of that research now. But that research was driven by the PMPs. They paid for, other than that $4 million, they paid for much of that through contributions of their own and through commercial processors. So with that, I'll make it brief. I think I went 7 minutes, but that's all I have for now. Thank you.
How's that? All right. Throw something at me. I tend to walk around as I talk, so hopefully you can hear me long enough. I guess I'm in the sweet spot. So as I was introduced, my name is Bill Templin. I'm a longtime Alaskan. My earliest memories are in Anchorage during really cold winters when it was really cold, and you had ice on the inside corners of the walls. We haven't seen that for a while, but I remember that. I remember also fish. Everywhere you could see, everywhere would be fish that you could walk across the streams on the backs of. At least that's what people told me it used to be like. I do remember fishing in the Upper Susitna. I remember fishing Chester Creek in Anchorage. I love to fish, so I fished even in Russian Jack. If you've ever been to the Russian Jack golf course, there's a little spring there that has little golden fin trout in it. And I caught those. It was great growing up in Alaska, and I grew up an Alaskan. I believe in Alaska. I drank the Kool-Aid, you might think, because it is a very different place. Alaska is. In Alaska, unlike most other states in the nation, Alaska is more than just a location. It's also an attitude, and it's an ownership, and it's an acceptance of responsibility. Nowhere else that I've gone have I seen the processes that we have here where the public gets to speak into what happens with the resources. So that's my sermon, but I just wanted you to know I'm speaking as a longtime Alaskan. I left for a little while, realized that I just missed it here, came back, and I've been working with the department for about 30 years, last May. So I'm hanging on for a little while to make sure I clean up my office before I leave. During my time here, I was with the department. I've worked from the very bottom, one of the lowest paid positions, which is a graduate intern. You don't even get benefits or time off or anything, up to where I am now as the chief fisheries scientist. And along the way, I worked for 20 years in the genetics program. Alaska Department of Fish and Game's genetics program is unusual across the nation, and a lot of other states have come to us to ask how that program works and what we do. I've also seen Alaska take on some massive projects and take on those projects with a lot of public input. I don't think anybody here probably understands just how big the Western Alaska Salmon Stock Identification Project was, or program really. WASIP it's called. It sampled fisheries all the way from Kotzebue, every fishery along the coast, all the way down around the corner up to Chignik. The length of that is about the length of the West Coast, a little longer than the West Coast because it goes down and around Baja if you were to measure it in the line. 3 years, lots of money, lots of energy, lots of public input there. Also, the Chinook Salmon Research Initiative, which in the early 2010s was kicked off in order to take a look at what's happening in Chinook even back that early. One of the reasons we can do these things is because it's vital for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game to be funded to get the work done that's needed to maintain the resource. In Alaska, the principle for why we do things is baked into our Constitution. It's in the Constitution that we need to be managing for sustained yield. We need to be thinking about the future and not short-term gains. Also, that the resources of the state are owned by the people of the state. From that principle, it's made usable through policies. Policies like the Sustainable Salmon Fisheries Policy, the Escapement Goal Fisheries Policies. These policies make something vague, like in the Constitution it says, sustained yield principle subject to preferences among beneficial uses. Well, that's a great principle, but how do you apply that? I bet you everybody in this room would have a slightly different idea about what that balance should be among preferential uses. So policy, that's where the principles work out. We've got genetics policies, we've got pathology policies, we've got a lot of policies. And then we have a process. And again, like I've touched on this before, we have a process that reviews what's happening, maybe makes changes in fishery management plans or other things, but that process allows the public to speak into those decisions in multiple ways. At the Board of Fish, at the RPT meeting for hatcheries, et cetera. Even sometimes in the hatchery, in the ADF&G permitting process. So principles, policy, process. If you don't remember anything else I said, remember those 3 Ps. Maybe add a 4th for public input. So I work for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and the mission statement there includes the responsibility to manage for the benefit of the economy and the well-being of Alaskans. So again, going back to what I was saying earlier, that's where we start from. We're working, we have the responsibility to manage for the benefit of the economy and the well-being of Alaskans. That means we adopt a precautionary approach, but it's important to remember precautionary approach is not just a biological principle. It's also economic, it's also societal, and it's cultural. The definition of the precautionary approach includes all 4 of those aspects. This means that when the Alaska Department of Fish and Game engages in research, which some might think is frivolous use of dollars and probably shouldn't happen. Our research is not for the sake of research. We don't do it so we can write papers. We don't do it so that we can fill out our CV or get an invitation to go talk somewhere. Our research focuses on management applications over publication. Our research is focused to serve best by the people, to serve best the people. Who are we doing this for? Who are the people using this resource for? And sometimes, many times, it's the whole state. ADF&G research is served best by thinking before we run models. We spend the time thinking about what we're going to do, whether it's a good idea to do, whether it can actually be accomplished prior to actually going out and spending the money and the time to conduct the research. And finally, and this is an important part, it seeks to understand the causes and the mechanisms behind what we see in order to know what to do and what outcomes to expect if we take action. We need those mechanisms. We need to understand those causes. Not all of them, but at least enough to make sure that we're not screwing things up worse if we make a decision or affecting the economy or the local community. So with that in mind, I was informed that we'd be talking about 2 topics potentially, or majoring in these topics. So I'd like to touch on ocean capacity, or what's known as competition in the ocean. I'd like to start out by saying that competition does occur. I guess I probably could stop right there, but competition does occur. It's a normal aspect of a healthy ecosystem. It powers the functions that balance adaptation and equilibrium, especially in the presence of change. Competition is always happening. But competition is not isolated to the relationship between 2 species. It's the outcome of an entire system. It's like a spider's web. You pull one part, you're pulling all the parts. So, unfortunately, science, while making huge advancements in the past 200 years or so, or more, it's advanced mainly by using controlled experiments, right? Laboratory experiments. And those experiments, you can artificially remove the rest of the web and you can focus on one little connection between 2 points in the web. You can't do that in ocean ecology. It's too big to try to understand that whole system and control everything. So instead, in marine ecology, we only have observations, and sometimes those observations contradict each other. The commissioner just talked about it. One of the ideas was that in order for there to be competition, two species should be in the same place at the same time, eating the same food. That's where the competition. We didn't see that when we did the International Year of the Salmon survey in 2022. So, given that, it is possible to do useful research. Some aspects of a useful study on competition. I'm going to provide these to you, and if you want the list, just ask me. I'll give it to you, so you don't have to write them all down. But useful research would look like this. It would have a wide and representative review of what is known. In other words, it wouldn't just start from just a small piece. It would actually take some time to look at what is already known about the background. I find that's a common error in many of the papers that I've read or had to review. Second, it would have a hypothesis. It would start with an expectation. What would I expect to see? From what I've just reviewed, what do I expect to be the relationship between two species, or a species in a food group or something? A species of salmon in a food group. Think about that. Come up with that hypothesis. It should be derived from the information you've collected. Third, it should just talk about and build in the expected cause and effect relationship and the assumptions that go with that interaction. That is often lacking. You can't necessarily find that in many of the papers that are out there. But if speaking from a management agency, that's what we need. We need to understand those causes and what the potential effect would be. The results then should include the measurements, like cause and effect and how strong that effect is, so that it can be used in decisions. If you just tell me there's an effect, but I don't know whether it's a big problem, a medium problem, or no problem at all, I can't do much in helping advise on decisions. Finally, the discussion of expected outcomes should include information on what would happen if we actually made a change to the system, right? Don't just ask for a change in the way things are done. Provide a good outlook or a good treatment of what you'd expect to happen if you did make a change. I'm going to give you three real quick examples, and I'm providing them because I was given a platform, all right? So first of all, one of the biggest mistakes I see in the research that's out there is this description, common term, increasing hatchery production. I'm sure you've heard that. You've heard it from speakers. Oh, hatchery production is increasing. It's increasing. Yes, it increased from the mid-1970s to the late 1980s. From 1990 to present, it's been steady. Hatchery production has been steady. It goes up for some species, but it also goes down for others. And so there's variability that's happening. But total hatchery production, if you look at it, you can check me. It's the North Pacific Anadromous Fish Commission, and I'll give you that website if you'd like. And you've seen those plots. I was going to throw one up here for you, but I saved you from that. For pink salmon, from 1990 to 2024, entire North Pacific, the hatchery production has actually decreased. It's less now than it was in 1990. So, one common error that I find. Another common error is kind of a bait and switch. They do this large data set, all the pink salmon in the ocean study. They find an effect from having so many pink salmon in the ocean. And then the switch is, well, we're going to talk about just the subset that's hatchery fish. So all of the way way this works is it gets the reader thinking about what happens with all these pinks, and then takes all of that effect and applies it to, say, hatchery fish. All right, so that's a better way to do it would be to just go ahead and use the hatchery fish in your analysis. The data are there. It's easy to do. Third, people don't understand how small the lever is that you can actually use to make a change. If you use biomass, which is a better measure of ecosystem interactions, competition is almost always done with biomass, the total weight of fish, total weight of pinks, total weight of sockeye. and you include all ages. Current analyses generally use just adults, but for chums and sockeye, there are other age groups out there eating as well and competing. If you use that, then we see that all pink, biomass of all pinks, hatchery and wild, is only 22%, not the 70% if you just use adults and numbers of fish. Hatchery production then becomes 3.3% of that total. So now we're down to 3.3% of the total biomass of pinks, chums, and sockeyes in the ocean. Alaska hatcheries, the biggest around, 2%. That's what it is, 2%. So if you're going to make a 50% change in hatchery production, you're going to basically move the dial about 1%. Okay, so I just need to put that out there because it's relevant and important to understand. This is why the Alaska Department of Fish and Game takes time, thinks about, and is careful with the research we do and the way it's interpreted. Now, I was also going to talk about straying, but straying is something Craig might want to ask me if he wants some questions, some answers. I understand, for those of you who are concerned or have heard about it, there is a straying study that's been going on in Lower Cook Inlet. There were stray salmon from Prince William Sound found in the streams in Lower Cook Inlet. Staff started collecting in 2012. So from 2012 to 2017, there's a report out there, but those were not collected under a good, what we call an operational plan. There was no real way to interpret that information. So beginning in 2018 and through 2022, we implemented a study that's done in a way that can be interpreted and used and trusted. So for those years, that report is coming out very soon. It's not out yet, and I would be looking for that to understand what's happening in your own backyard. With that said, and having gotten the nod, I used up Steve's 3 minutes. Thank you very much for your time.
I think I'll stay seated here. I think the two most important things we've heard here are that hatcheries are a big business and that we preferentially treat fisheries. Where those two things meet has historically been a problem for wildlife management. We eliminated market hunting in this country because we couldn't control those things. Hatcheries are different in that instead of taking something out of the system, we put something into the system. I think we have to recognize there's a carrying capacity to the ocean. Anybody disagree?
I just agreed, yes.
You disagree? You think this?
No, I agreed.
You agree. There's a carrying capacity to the ocean. And to Bill's point of what percent you put on it, there's tipping points. If you know anything about engineering and you engineer a beam for what it'll hold in the house, you put another 10 pounds on it, the engineer is going to tell you that sucker is going to collapse. You're just asking for trouble. I don't think all of the problems we're having with Alaska fisheries are related to hatcheries. I mean, I think, and I think Bill's probably going to agree with me on this one, warm water is an issue here. Warm water is pretty clearly an issue for pink salmon. Pink salmon biomass increases. We manage pink salmon for maximum sustained yield, which we probably, maybe we should think about not doing that. Maybe we should manage them for a lower number of wild fish and let the hatcheries make their money. And, we can cut some competition in the ocean because those pinks aren't worth much. I mean, it's like 75 cents a fish now. It's, compared to what other species are worth, it's chicken feed. And I want to correct Steve on one thing. Commercial fishermen aren't paying for those hatcheries. Cost recovery is paying for those hatcheries. And that cost recovery comes from fish grazing on a public pasture for which the hatcheries provide no compensation to the state. Why is that? We don't let oil and gas operators take it for themselves only. Should more of that money come back to the state? Should cost recovery be increased and the hatcheries pay some sort of tax? It's nice to think of them as private nonprofit hatcheries, but that's kind of a scam. They're businesses employing people, and their jobs are just like anybody else's jobs. They take home a paycheck. I remember when Lad McCauley started Douglas Island Pink and Chum in Juneau, I was there and he used to complain to me about he had too much money coming in and he needed to hire more people because he needed to get rid of profit. And I don't know how many he added, and if it had been Lad run out of control, he would have put a hatchery everywhere to try and use up that money so he wouldn't have a profit. The question then becomes, since we've set this up, in those cases where maybe it should be scaled back or unraveled, how do you do that? I mean, Cook Inlet is right now the biggest example of that. The Cook Inlet Aquaculture Association is, last time I checked, $18 million underwater. They got squat for cost recovery this year. They're going to need to borrow more money, probably be $20 million underwater. Technically, those fishermen who started this off paying to cover the cost of these things, and that is how it began before cost recovery picked up the cost of the hatcheries, they're on the hook for that. I mean, if somebody really want to make an issue of it, that money is something commercial fishermen who voted to set up these organizations are responsible for paying back. Now, it'd be chaos if the state tried to make them do that. But, you know, are we going to take a $20 million hit statewide? Just say we're going to forgive the loans? And do we want to keep going down this path knowing that these kinds of problems arise? There's just about a million questions here, none of which have answers. And, you know, Bill's right. There's nothing definitive you can say about what happens in the ocean. I mean, you can make a lot of correlations. You're proving causation. It's a mess out there. It's the jungle to the jungle extreme. I think we can agree on that too, right? Everything killing everything.
I'll agree on that part. I do think that there are some methods that could be applied by having your hypothesis before you have run your model and looked at your results, and that's a new thing coming out. It's been used in economics and now is being used in ecology, causal analyses.
And I agree with you to some extent and disagree with you because we've just gone through a pandemic where I've learned you can model anything.
Amen.
Maybe a couple thoughts. So Larry Phillips, American Sportfishing Association. I spent 25 years with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife before coming on with ASA. We're a member trade organization. But there is a finite amount of productivity in the ocean. And there is natural variability that we struggle to understand annually in terms of what we see coming back. Our ability to maybe get this right is challenging, right? And I think there's lots of lessons to be learned in the lower 48. We've got 125 hatcheries. We traded the productivity of our river systems years ago for hydropower, for agriculture, for society. And you know, we're in a position right now where you can't turn that around, particularly in California, in some of our systems. But I think that some of the lessons to be learned here, we need to continue to ask these really difficult questions.
Yeah, and it's not just us. I mean, we have to recognize that the Russians, who we're now not talking to, they're putting a lot of fish into the North Pacific Ocean these days. And those fish play a part too. And as I think it was Kevin or was it Doug pointed out, the Japanese are still at it. We're collecting a lot of Japanese fish, Asian fish. It's a big problem that really needs an international solution. And I don't know how you get one of those at this point.
Well, I'd like to pipe in here. One, I worked with Lad, and I'd like to say that he was never in the position while he lived where he made too much money. Our organization had to support their organization for many years, and it was only after his passing, tragic loss while he was working for the state of Alaska and died on this highway. We just traveled down today. And so he's looking from above thinking, well, we're doing a lot better now, but certainly not while he was alive running.
Well, all I can say is what he told me.
And so, but I'd like to speak to the carrying capacity. I mean, it's a dynamic equilibrium. It's not so simple. All those fish that are going into the ocean that Bill has mentioned, we're talking 5 billion hatchery fish. There's 25 billion wild fish going in, wild salmon going into the ocean. So in numbers, it's about 15%, and that's across the entire Pacific Rim. And Bill kind of went through those numbers, but there's a much greater competition out there from all nekton. If you look at all nekton, so squid and all the fishes, hatchery salmon in Alaska is less than 0.5%. I mean, it's minuscule compared to that complex competition going off in the ocean. In addition, the fish that we do release here in Alaska, 95% of them are dead within the first couple months, and they're being consumed by other fishes. It's not so simple as they just go out in the ocean and they compete and mow everything down. It's much more complex than that.
Well, of course, it's more complex than that.
I'm not disagreeing. And as a matter of fact, I've been a proponent, as I spoke to, that we need to continue doing research.
And I don't disagree with you on 95% of them disappearing. I mean, that's the life of salmon. It's, you know, they feed everything. It's not wild fish, hatchery fish. They all get massacred when they go to sea.
Yeah, the uniqueness of the difference here between this program and what we've got in the lower 48 in particular is we're mitigating for loss production. And whether we're doing it in a right measured way, you know, you could argue that the 125 million hatchery Chinook that we're producing in the 3 states is potentially larger or different than what we historically produced there, or arguably maybe less. But in Alaska, there is already a mechanism that's constraining how much the ocean can produce. And when we artificially put fish into the ocean, again, upwards of 5 billion, there is a disruption in the complexity of those food webs, especially at various life stages, estuaries. And as you put it, some of those fish do die and they're consumed, but they're also competing for resources up until that.
And we're not mitigating. We're producing. These aren't hatcheries to make up for what man did to mess things up. These are hatcheries to make money, solely to make money. We have done mitigation. We have the most successful mitigation program in the North American continent. It's right over here in Tustamina Lake, where they put hatchery fish in there. A lawsuit was filed. They put an end to putting hatchery fish in there. It became a self-sustaining fishery that we now worry about it over-escaping. It's the most successful mitigation project in the world. I can't think of any other, can you? I mean, they'd die for something like that in the Pacific Northwest.
Gentlemen, I'd like to hear a little about straying.
Should I go there? Should I go heretic here? I'm going to be the heretic here. I think that we're worrying too much about straying. From what we know about salmon and hatcheries, they evolve very quickly. There's no reason to believe that happens any differently in the wild, where there's a lot of environmental pressures on them to change. Actually, Mr. Templin and I were talking about this beforehand, because I would love someone to go back and take some more genetic history on the Tustamina fish, Kisila fish, and see if you can still find the fingerprint of hatchery fish in there. Because they may have evolved to the point now where it's hatchery feral, and now, well, they might as well all be wild, because genetically they're all kind of at the same point. It's not the big issue to me to worry about. The bigger issue to me is at-sea competition and what we have going on with predation, which I think Steve and I agree on, is another issue. I mean, I'm looking at Cook Inlet this year and have looked at Cook Inlet for a long time. And what you see on the north end of Cook Inlet is different than what you see in the middle and the south end of Cook Inlet. And it makes me wonder if, we have so many young fish, we're flooding the zone, so to speak, and the streams on this north end are paying the cost, or whether we get a bunch of predators massing out there because there's such an outflux of fry, and they happen to, for some reason, nail more north end fish than south end fish. But I mean, those puzzles are huge. And Bill could spend 2 more careers trying to figure them out.
I'm just going to say it's a little surprising that I'm going to argue the other side. Straying is important. It is concerning. Okay, that doesn't mean that it's always going to have harm associated with it. If we see it, it's a signal that we should be paying attention, unless we've already dealt with that straying and determined that it's not a harm. It's an observance. Salmon stray, I mean, it's part of their life. Most of them will home, and that's why we can fish on these special populations of salmon. But sometimes, and for some species, a significant number of them will stray and go to another stream. That's why we have salmon in Cook Inlet. It wasn't so long ago that we were under 5,000 feet of ice here. So there were no salmon here at that time. So the salmon we have here came from somewhere as the ice moved back. That's the straying. That's a good thing. Homing is a good thing too, because if you survived to go out to the ocean, that must mean that wherever you were spawned was a good spot, right? So then you can go back to that spot and have a good chance of your offspring, your children, continuing to produce. Straying is a problem, but it's a problem for different species.
A fatalist might think none of this is under our control. I mean, if you look at pink salmon in the Atlantic, I mean, they've kind of exploded there because of the warming water, and there may be things here we can't control or begin to control.
Next thing you'll do is you'll be asking for Atlantics over here.
I think the good news is that we've done made so many mistakes in the Northwest that we've studied a lot of these issues to death, and it can certainly inform some of the science about changes in fitness and gene flow and some of these areas where we're looking at these really difficult questions.
One more quick question that I have, I directed at Steve. Across the Gulf of Alaska, we're seeing a decline in the number of king salmon. Are the hatchery returns coming back as robust as you expected or historically, or are they dropping off and they're younger and smaller as well?
That's a big question. All salmon have decreased in size to some extent, and that includes king salmon, probably more so than the rest of them. I guess I would say in Southeast Alaska, where there are almost 0 pink salmon hatcheries, and king salmon have been in a decline for about a decade, but over the last few years, including this year, the king salmon are coming back. Many of the stocks in Southeast have made their escapement goal, have had harvest, as you heard the commissioner talk about, and there is recovery in the face of having a large chum salmon program for 30 years, 35 years in Southeast Alaska. I think it's far too simplistic to say that it's cause and effect and you can point your finger and know for certain. And I would disagree with Craig that people don't care about straying. The reason we put $25 million into a straying study is because there is concern. There has been concern since the program was initiated in the early 70s. The genetics policy of the state pointed out there would be straying because all salmon stray to some extent, and pink salmon more than others. And so we want to know what is happening. And so I'm sorry to go on long on this, but currently we're doing research with kelp amino acids to see if we can improve the homing of the releases. And we've been doing work for decades on trying to improve the homing. It's a difficult thing because straying is genetically programmed in wild fish and therefore in the hatchery fish. And so straying is going to occur, but we're trying to mitigate that, is what I'd say.
Gentlemen, I'm going to call it in respect for the next panel, but I want to thank you for the dialogue. I want to thank you for the tenor of the dialogue, because as important as it is to disagree, it's probably even more important to do it civilly, constructively. And I want to thank you all very much for a great discussion. We're going to maybe take maybe at the most 5 minutes and give the governmental group up here. Craig will be moderating this next session, and you want to hang around for it. It's going to be good. Schedule, respect everybody's time. We call this next panel Voices in Governance from Capitol Hill to the Kenai Peninsula. And Senator Sullivan has already given us some of his time. This panel is comprised of Congressman Nick Begich, Chair of the Alaska Board of Fisheries, Marit Carlson Van Dort, and Peter Murkowski, the Mayor of the Kenai Peninsula Borough. I've known and worked with Peter off and on for probably 20-some years, and I struggle to keep up with my good friend Marit as chairman of the Board of Fisheries and give good advice and hope for the best, and usually that's what comes out. I've never had a chance to meet Nick before, and I thank him very much for being here because I know his time is extremely valuable. I'd like Marit to go first, and then Pete, and if Nick, if you don't mind, you finish up and you get kind of the last word there. Marit, you can do it from there. You can do it from here. You're on your own.
Thanks, Kevin. Well, I'm pretty comfortable here, so let's hang out here for a second. So, hi everybody. My name is Marit Carlson Van Dort. I am the chair of the Alaska Board of Fisheries. I'm about halfway through my third term on the board. 5 of the 7 years of my service have been as chair, and ladies and gentlemen, what you just witnessed in that last panel was a little mini taste of what happens at a Board of Fisheries meeting. Passionate engagement, informed engagement, where there's a lack of definitive data or any data at all sometimes, with a decision pending and a question of where the burden of proof should lie when you're making these types of decisions. So, in the example that we just had with respect to hatcheries, the question that I am often presented with at the board is it incumbent upon a stakeholder or a proposer to prove that there isn't a negative impact, or conversely, is it incumbent to prove that there is one happening? And so that is sometimes where there's a lot of tension and debate that lies, in my experience. So with respect to the Board of Fisheries, I think it's a really unique system for how our fish and game resources are managed in the state. I am unaware of any other state or jurisdiction that invites and has the input and the influence that the public does in how our fish and game regulations are developed in this state. It is a very open and public process. And, as the Board of Fisheries, we are tasked with the conservation and development of Alaska's fisheries. I see my job as chair as to sort of manage and facilitate that engagement and ensure that there is a transparent and fair process through which those decisions are made. So, in terms of my area of expertise, I am not a fisheries expert, but, what I try to do is make sure that the process through which those decisions are made is fair and transparent to the public. We've got a 7-member board, gubernatorially appointed and legislatively confirmed. Again, another option for the public to weigh in on who is sitting at that table and making those decisions. We typically will see about 200 to 300 proposals submitted to the board each year. Over half of those typically are submitted by individual people, not necessarily industry or other agencies, but just folks that are interested and concerned about how fisheries regulations are promulgated. About a third on any given year of the proposals that are submitted will get passed. And by and large, the job of the board is allocation, right? It's deciding who gets how much, primarily, and most of the fisheries in the state of Alaska, I would say, are fully allocated. So those discussions can get pretty spicy, I would say. Again, my job is to try and make sure that those conversations occur openly and as respectfully as possible. And sometimes the board's tools in which we can carve up that pie, if you will, are kind of blunt. We don't have any fiscal authorities at the board, so we can't compel the department or the administration to enact programs or spend money in any kind of way. We're pretty much restricted to time, area, methods, and means for the most part. So it is, a fairly, like I said, a fairly blunt tool. But I am interested in the discussions that have occurred here today, and that will continue, I think, over the course of the next couple of days, about whether or not the board process and policies should change. I heard a little bit about that in the first panel discussion. And if so, how? Because again, the ultimate goal, right, is to be able to conserve and develop our fisheries, and we want them to be sustainable for many, many generations to come. So I'll stop talking and see kind of how the conversation flows, but thank you for the invitation to be here.
Peter?
Thank you. Thank you, Craig. I just have a lot of papers, so it's easier to organize here. Like earlier discussions, I'm going to talk about where it all started as a poor white child in South Florida in 1961. Just kidding. That was my opening joke. So, interesting. Here's how I'm going to start. And you've touched on these things from the Alaska Fish and Wildlife News, from the ADF&G website. It talks about the early days. One of the reasons we're a state is because we didn't have faith in federal management of our fisheries. I still don't. And that's problematic. In the 40s, once the war kicked off and it became knowledge, there was knowledge of the riches of our Cook Inlet fisheries. We started with fish traps. We immediately began putting an enormous amount of pressure on these fisheries, and within 10 years we had a problem, right? So it has a lot to do with statehood, because Alaskans had kind of wanted to strike out on our own. Felt like we could do better. We did do better. So one of the earliest commissioners, the earliest commissioner, Andy Anderson, said something, and he said to his biologist, "Gentlemen, the governor has instructed me to return the salmon runs to their former abundance regardless of the pain that is inflicted on the people." Said, "I'm charging each one of you to make sure that every stream in your district is filled to the maximum spawning capability. Now, if you allow an over-escapement, depriving the fishermen of their livelihood, you can expect to be criticized. But on a personal level, gentlemen, I want you to understand that if you allow an under-escapement, you can expect to be fired." Right? So this is not a new problem that we have in our state. And I am not a biologist. I do serve on the National Fish Habitat Partnership Board. I think it's an important position for Alaska. A lot of those federal dollars come here to ensure healthy riparian habitat. I'm not a fisheries biologist, I said, but everyone, so on the Kenai Peninsula, there are 62,000 residents and approximately 61,000 fisheries biologists. And you hear rednecks and camo at church talking about the benthic environment and riparian habitat and anadromous streams, which you wouldn't hear anywhere else, right? So why do we care? Does fish matter? They're what we do, what we eat, what brings our families together. They are our recreation, our cultural fabric. They provide our nutrition and provide a major proportion of our commerce. So it matters. And I love looking out at the group here because we got legislators here for some reason gathered in this corner. You have the chamber folks who know how important fish are to us. You have some set netters out there, non-mixed in very well with some of the others in the room. You have the state employees. We're all in a group, and us all being in a group has not served our fisheries well. I appreciate your service very much. Shouldn't be about allocation. It should be about fish, and there should be an eye to commerce, right? And Cook Inlet is such a dynamic body of water with so many impacts. We've got the deep water lake production that we're seeing not only in the Bay, but we're seeing here. We stopped the planting of fish in Bear Creek, except no one told those fish. We reached maximum escapement in the Kasilof River before the season ever started this year, right? These are enormously productive systems, and we have to challenge getting fish to the shallower streams up north in adequate numbers, yet not allowing millions of fish of commerce to go by the wayside. It's challenging. It's very difficult, and politics gets in the way. Fish don't have an R or a D next to them. They're not a member of a user group. I have 4 boats, excluding canoes, kayaks, and inflatables. I'm a drifter in Cook Inlet, have been for 35 years. I have a river boat that I use very regularly. I have a drift boat for the upper river. I have a boat that I keep in the water in Homer in the summer, which doesn't see a lot of use, unfortunately. But that's what being an Alaskan's about, right? It's what we all do. So through the years of people duking it out in church because they belong to one, I actually broke up a fight with 2 guys in my church. A fight, not an argument. Why are we doing that? We have got to come together on the maximum production and the maximum values of those fish. So we have wonderful scenery here, abundant critters, a healthy environment, but we got to be honest with ourselves. the 152 million in tourism alone, that commerce on the Kenai Peninsula matters. You can double that with a successful commercial year. It matters. Why does it matter? 13 years of out-migration is happening for a reason. There's no hope. And we have the ability through our fisheries managers and our board of fish to better maximize those by coming together, pushing aside the politics and making good things happen. We understand it's not going to be the same on low return years. But when we have high return years, that commerce is so important, not just on the Kenai Peninsula, but that spreads throughout the region. Fish matter. You can say that people come for the mountains and people come for the game, but they come for 3 weeks in July, right? And throughout the country, and I'm learning this from the Fish Habitat Partnership, they have similar problems. They have similar user groups. They have similar issues. Many of them have been very successful on recognizing the value of fish and putting fish first, and some haven't. But we always have. So it's time. I'm a member of the Alaska Outdoor Council. I'm a member of KPFA. I've been a member of UCEDA. I'm a member of the Guides Association because I understand the value of all 4 of my boats, right? So it's time we move beyond that. So my discussion is about optimizing this opportunity by putting fish first, yet increasing the understanding about how to work together to provide flexibility for maximum value on years like these and adequate value on years with lower returns. I love that we reached minimum escapement this year. I'm very hopeful. I love giant sockeye filling the rivers for everyone from people out in the inlet to folks that rent our VRBOs and hotel rooms. It all matters, right? And I hope we can get there. It's time for the next generation to get together, to stop duking it out in church, and start figuring out how we get maximum productivity out of our fish, how we get fish to the valley, how we maximize what is produced in these deep lakes. It's time. So I'm really hopeful. I'm thrilled that we're together talking about this today. It means a lot to me that I've been invited to speak here, and I'm ready to pull up a seat at the table. It really matters. And our fish are forever. I forgot to mention the conservation people who are so responsible for the health of increasing productivity in many streams that have been previously blocked off for the last 50 years around here from homesteader road construction practices. But we are all one. We've been divided. It's fruitless and counterproductive to fish and what fish can do for us in the state of Alaska. Thank you. I look forward to chatting some more.
Take that with back.
Okay.
I'm going to corner you guys for a couple of questions. Congressman?
Thank you, and a big thank you to the Kenai River Sportfishing Association for hosting this outstanding event again this year. The Kenai River Classic is not just about sport fishing, it's about stewardship, education, and protecting the future of one of Alaska's most valuable natural resources. Kenai River holds a unique place in our state. It's a world-class fishery, a tourism driver, and a deeply rooted part of Alaska's very identity. But more than that, it's a river that connects people from all walks of life. Sport anglers, commercial operators, local families, and subsistence users all depend on a healthy and abundant fishery. And I'll tell you, I was just in Kotzebue yesterday. I was up in Kotzebue and I had a surprising conversation with a local resident who said that her family actually subsists in part on the Kenai River. That they have family members down here, they'll barter, they'll trade, sometimes they'll fly down from Kotzebue, which is above the Arctic Circle, to come to the Kenai to fish. So that's why I believe strongly in science-based management, grounded in data and aimed at long-term abundance. And that's a key watchword, making sure that we are managing our fisheries for abundance. We've heard from our panelists, both panelists today and previous panels, and how in many respects we're fighting over allocations. Those conversations get so much easier when we are managing for full carrying capacity and abundance. The single best way to reduce conflict among user groups then is to ensure that there are enough salmon in the river for everyone. When we manage for abundance, we protect opportunity for sport fishing, for commercial harvest, and for those subsistence traditions that go back generations. That requires solid investment in fishery science, stock assessments, escapement counts, habitat monitoring, and strong coordination between state and federal managers. We need to ensure that our policy decisions reflect real conditions on the ground, not overly assumptive models or political pressure from outside the state of Alaska. We also need to continue to focus on bycatch volumes, ecosystem stewardship, and policies that protect our fish stock outside the river system. This includes kings and halibut and various crab species. At the federal level, I've advocated for putting more resources into fisheries research, especially where it supports state-led efforts. Alaska knows how to manage Alaska's fisheries. We need federal policy that reinforces that idea, not one-size-fits-all rules from Washington, D.C., as we also heard from Senator Sullivan echoing similar ideas. We also need to be vigilant about protecting the health of our river systems, from water quality to habitat preservation. And I think that the Kenai River is a model for habitat restoration and preservation, and certainly Kenai River Sportfishing Association is a model for other organizations throughout the state in that respect. The Kenai River Sportfishing Association has been a leader promoting responsible, conservation-minded access to this incredible fishery. You understand that supporting abundance isn't simply good policy, it's good economics, it's good for our communities, and it's good for the entire state of Alaska. And I will continue to work in Congress to support these shared goals: a healthy, accessible Kenai River, strong salmon returns that are also predictable year after year, and science-first management that gives our fishery managers the tools they need to manage for abundance. Thanks for the invitation, and more importantly, for your commitment to ensuring that the Kenai River remains a resource we can all enjoy and be proud to protect. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman, but don't run away, because I think there are a couple issues that people in this room want to talk about. One of them is federal management in the inlet. Is there a way with the administration we now have that is against regulation to put an end to that and give the state authority back in the inlet?
You know, I think most people in the room, I hope most people in the room would agree with this, that fish don't respect the invisible boundary on a map. And fisheries management gets a lot easier and a lot more streamlined when you have one clear jurisdiction. And I think that's appropriate here in the Cook Inlet. I think that's important, and certainly I advocate and will continue to advocate for the state of Alaska being the...
So is there a practical way to get there, since we kind of got the courts in the middle?
I think there's a way to get there, but I think it's going to take a lot of education in the Congress and with this administration. Fisheries has not been their top priority. They've been focused on a number of other issues, and so it's going to take a lot of advocacy, our office, other offices, people in this room, to make sure that this bubbles up in terms of priority.
And I'll direct the other question to Peter, but feel free to weigh in here if you see any federal help that come in the way. But we've just had a major fishery shutdown for what, 4 years now, basically? I mean, they fished a couple days this year. Clearly, we have too many permits there, for one thing. How do we change that fishery so we can keep some remnant of it running?
So that's a good question. If I can just touch on the last question, there's a guy named Doug in the room here that has the language for how Congress can help. Moving the federal waters line down to the 59 line solves the entire problem. So let's talk. That's a easy thing to do. But what that does is move the federal management waters down out of the fishery altogether. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work for efficiency. The feds should not be managing our anadromous fish. That's just the bottom line. So, but yeah, so I had a little bill. It was called a set net buyback bill and had lots of support. except for one guy from Southeast that happened to be a co-chair of finance, not mentioning Bert's name. But there are options that I think would work. I do encourage the Board of Fish we investigated alternative gear types in Cook Inlet for selective harvest. They were successful. I nudge the board to accept those methods, which would have put set netters in the water much earlier without a king problem. That has been a very successful result from couple different gear types that have been
So
experimented.
should the board be considering letting people trade out permits? I mean, are there sites that you could convert set net permits to beach seine permits effectively and efficiently?
It seems so. The department can weigh in on that if they'd like. It seems like it was successful. There was some poundage that was produced without an interception problem. Doug, you're hiding
ahead,
behind
Doug.
your hands back there.
Come on up here. Yes, I know what some of the problems are, and some of them need to be resolved, that we need to know if it's working or not, but don't look at me like that.
You're aware. Okay, yeah. So we're experimenting with alternate gear types. The Gabriels were very kind enough to start figuring out a way, how can we continue to fish sockeye without interfering with the return of king salmon to meet our recovery goals. So last year, a year and a half ago, we experimented first off with it. I think we issued like 4 or 5 permits. We learned a lot. We learned a lot that we can actually harvest sockeye salmon without a significant impact on Chinook salmon. The question then is, we saw that on 1 or 2 beaches. We didn't know how that would be impacting the wide range of east side set net distributions in the inlet. So the board discussed this in depth at a meeting last spring and decided it wasn't quite ready to go take the step of changing over set net gear or seine gear during the recovery period because they wanted some more information. Very promising. We again evaluated this year. We got some additional sites located both up north of the river as well as south of the river, and we learned a lot more. I think there are opportunities moving forward to look at changing some of these sites from set net to seine gear, or basically during recovery periods of time, putting seine gear in the water where you would have set net gear, which is very non-selective. So we're learning a lot. We're going to continue those experiments as we move forward. And there may be other types of gear types. The dip net fishery is a prime example. We harvested tens of thousands of sockeye in dip nets in the last couple of years. That worked. Was it a change? Was it something that we did willingly? No, because there's a lot of desire to maintain status quo. But as Peter said, we got to look at economic opportunity. And maybe some of these other gear types aren't as effective, but they do continue those operations in the water, and they do continue to provide some economic benefit. So, yeah, I think there's possibilities.
You didn't think you were going to get away with, right? No, I'm sorry. Craig, if I can just, then you asked the second question. Yeah, I think a reduction in gear would be beneficial. I wouldn't have done the bill, worked with set netters extensively and CFEC, and I think that is a solution. I think drifters are an easier tool. I think reducing gear on the east side, this problem is likely not going to go away. And I think by working together, we can look at alternative gear types and those that are willing to move on from this way of life. It was voluntary, and I think it would be a positive outcome.
Well, the elephant in the room there is where the money comes from.
Right.
And I mean, can we get another, federal backed program as the purse seiners got in Southeast to, finance the go and everybody pays it back in the years after? Or what are we looking at as options? You know more about this than I do.
There are various options. People have to weigh the priority of moving forward away from a struggle that's been going on for about, I'd say, 45 years.
Yeah, it's
heavily,
long as I've
right? I
been
mean,
here.
there's a value to that. There are federal conservation dollars. There are folks interested enough to solve the problem that might be willing to invest, and a loan program would be beneficial. But I think it's not, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a large bill. And I don't know if things look promising. I'm not sure as many set netters are going to want to leave the industry. But at the point that we were measuring, it was a 95% support rate for set netters, which solves a problem. And I'm not going to say that set netters are a problem, but people are tired of the fight. It doesn't mean that other gear types might soften the number of folks ready to leave the fishery, because excess escapement, and I'm not going to do the science thing on this excess escapement because I don't know. We're going to learn about that. We're putting 4.5 million fish into a river. We're going to learn about it firsthand here in the next 4 or 5 years. But whatever goes up the river is lost to commerce and out the door. And we know that we're above that point where it's painful for South Central to lose that level of commerce. So we've got to find a better way.
Well, I don't think we've lost that level of commerce on the full 4 million. I think we're going to have a sport harvest like you've never seen, that we kind of flooded the river with fishermen this year, which I didn't fish because there were too many people. No, honestly, I just went down and dipped netted some salmon and got out of there, and they quit early. There were so many fish. It's clearly a mark of too many.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you. I would have to crunch the numbers on the X vessel plus value added value to Alaska versus the tourism dollars. They're all important. There's a balance. There's only so many you can catch. There's only so many anyone can catch. And when they're not harvested and you've adequately supplied the river with what you would require for another bumper crop in 4 years, at some point it's a loss of commerce. So that's the piece that I'm talking about. I don't know what that number is. I'm not going to have that argument. I'm not going to have the over escapement argument, but I'm hoping that the department will focus on this year's return and correlate those numbers with 3 and 4 years from now to see what that end result looks like. I'd like to know that number.
I think everyone would.
Let me respond to something here. Let me distill it back a little bit more, because economics are also part of the allocation criteria the board considers. But if you take it back a step, it boils down to mixed stock, weak stock management. Okay, so if we got abundant sockeye, that's great. And if we had abundant kings, that's great. Everybody would be fishing. The issue, the tension arises where you have one stock, i.e. the Chinook stock in this example, that is not doing well, and they're coming in at the same time the sockeye do. So you have to start taking a look at how do you approach problem solving when you've got Chinook that are weak and sockeye that are great right now coming in at the same time. And that's where that selective gear harvest piece of it becomes very important and starts to address some of those issues, because certainly from my perspective, I want to see people going fishing. I mean, whether it's with a hook and a line or a net. I mean, I come from, a seining background. I'm one of the worst anglers you're going to encounter. But it's the weak stock management piece that we encounter all over the state. The Kenai and Upper Cook Inlet is one very, very good and obviously prescient example of that. But sometimes it doesn't even have to have like a sport fish component, or it could just be a subsistence and a commercial component, and you're still restricted because you've got multiple stocks that are coming in simultaneously. And that's where the challenge, at least for me, really arises.
I think you put your finger right on it, because at the end of the day, the biggest economic threat that we could have is an ESA listing of Cook Inlet Kings, right? And so I think what we're doing right now, as painful as that can be, is appropriate, because we need to make sure that that stock recovers so that everybody can get back to that abundant fishery that I was talking about.
I think you just made an excellent point, that the best evidence against an ESA claim is what we did this year, that we put the minimum spawner goal in the river. I mean, I think that really strengthens the case immensely for the state in pushing back.
Just to be clear, Craig, is anyone up here under the impression that we're not saying the same thing? Okay, good. Just want to clarify that.
Sit down. Okay, thank you very much. This was wonderful. Let's give him a hand. Another great example of, smart, experienced people had their hands on the controls for years, and they can sit down and have a great conversation. I thank them. We're going to take about 1 minute to shuffle off, and Senator Murkowski, Lisa, you're up. Thank you all.
We need to put some fish wheels in there. Take them out nice and clean up the river.
Up here to also reflect on the Kenai River Sportfishing Association, reflect on CRISA, which is really easy for me to do because I feel like I've lived so much of the origins of the Kenai River Sportfishing Association, just through my husband, through the relationships that we built with so many friends here on the river. Bob Penny, of course, was legendary in his role as he facilitated CRISA and not only the kind of the incorporation of the mission, but really what it meant for a community to come around, to come underneath an organization to say, we want this to be a priority of our community. And so the focus, the mission on what we do for habitat, on what we do to build infrastructure, on what we do to provide for public access, for education, for the health of the river itself, it really does wrap up and involve so much of community. So I want to acknowledge those that have carried on this pretty incredible mission now for 41 years. Shannon Martin and I were talking earlier. Shannon's doing a great job for you there. You've got a strong board. It's nice to see Juna Penny as chair. Again, the benefactors, those that come together, those of you that will be participating in the classic this weekend, what you do to help support that mission is really part of the Kenai's success. We talk about the Kenai as being this crown jewel of recreational fishing in the state. And again, I don't want to go down the road of what you all enjoyed in July while I was back in Washington, D.C., and it was hot and it was bothersome. And every now and again, you just kind of want to escape to your friends' social medias just to see what they're doing. And every single one of them has massive strings of sockeye. I was like, oh my gosh. And I'm so happy for them. I really am. I really am, because what this is about, this is not just about fish in your freezer. This is about a culture. This is what we do as Alaskans. Our summer defines us by really our fishing. It's our fishing, it's our hiking, but it's so much of it is around what happens. And it's here on this peninsula, and it's here particularly on the Kenai. And I hope that you take stock of what that means, because you're entrusted with a great responsibility. And I think that's what Krissa recognized so many decades ago, that yes, this is a crown jewel. Yes, this is a bountiful river, but we can't ever take for granted that it will continue to be that bounty. And believe me, I have Walter reminding me that every time I'm in my office in Washington, D.C. For those of you who've not been to my office or who were not in my boat in 2006 when I was on the river with Mike as my guide, and I don't remember the other gentlemen that I was fishing with because they didn't matter. The one that mattered was Walter, my 63-pound king salmon that I hauled out of the river. Beautiful, chrome, gorgeous, gorgeous fish. Best fish I've ever caught. Smart for me, it was not larger than Ted Stevens' massive king that he hauled out, not on that same trip. But it was important for me because, again, it was a reminder of this extraordinary bounty that comes from this river. And that fish that is now mounted and in my conference room is a reminder that those fish don't come back. Those fish are not there if we do not take care, if we do not focus on our role as stewards and the responsibility that brings. And so it's about conservation, it's about habitat, it's about infrastructure. It's also about the people who use this river. And this is, again, an area where I'm going to give a shout out to Krissa, because in addition to using funds wisely to make investments here, you are making investments in the future. The Kenai River Kids Classic that was started so many years ago, and I was really honored to be able to be part of that discussion at the Penny's house, where talking about the Kenai Classic and how great that was, but how important it is to make sure that young kids are exposed to this river. And we look around and we say, everybody knows how to fish. We're Alaskans. But the idea that we could introduce kids to not only the joy of fishing, but the responsibility of management of a fisheries. That is a great story that continues to keep on giving. And so to know that just a couple weeks ago, maybe just a week ago now, there were 100 kids that came down from the military bases that get put out on a river, that are introduced to fishing. Maybe the fishing wasn't so good for them, but they learned so much. And it's that exposure, again, that is so important. So there's a lot of things going on in the environment that is out there. And when I say the environment, I don't necessarily mean the natural environment, but the political environment that has implications on what we're trying to do here, not only on the Kenai, but with regards to our fisheries more broadly. We've all been following the petition that was filed by the Seattle-based group Wild Fish Conservancy. And in their petition, what they ask for is to list, quote, list one or more evolutionary significant units of Chinook salmon in the state of Alaska as a threatened or endangered species under the Endangered Species Act, and to designate critical habitat. Well, that petition didn't go anywhere. And then in May of this year, the Wild Fish Conservancy filed a lawsuit against NOAA and what they said you had failed to meet essential legal deadlines under the ESA and delaying federal protections to at-risk Alaskan Chinook salmon. I raise this because in addition to everything else that our fisheries are faced with, when you think about changes in climate and predators and the threats that we are seeing across the environment, you also have the political environment that is presenting challenges in ways that I think many of us might not have anticipated. And so we are sitting and waiting. We expect NOAA's ruling to come sometime next spring. But I'm looking at this action, the possibility or the potential for others following that. And I can't think of a situation that would be a bigger mistake for us and for the fish than to move forward to have a listing. All you need to do is look at Washington State. You look at other species. ESA listings are just not the way that you protect and you sustain salmon. I don't think we want the listing. I don't think we need it. I think we've got a better model for it. And I think the model that you can look to is what we see here on the Kenai, which is a rebuilding, protecting stocks, protecting the habitat, and we're seeing that it's working. I was talking with Eldon about the numbers that we're seeing with the kings that are slowly returning. It is an effort, but we are seeing some changes. And then you look at the sockeyes, and again, you don't need to go further than people's Instagrams, but it's really extraordinary as we're seeing not only the fish coming in, but how it's impacting the economy here, how it's impacting the guides that rely on our rivers, what it means for those tourists who are booking their trips. They used to come up in earlier summer for the kings. We're now seeing them later, but you're seeing people that are leaving happy. They've got a smile on their face because they've got fish that they're going to be eating. So we know that this is hard. It is a hard and a challenging time. And so making sure that we are aware of the landscape at all levels, environmentally, politically, and economically. I'm I'm going to wrap my comments because you all need to get out in the sun, and I want you to know that the delegation that you have back in Washington, D.C. is really very keenly focused on all of our fisheries and the health of all of our fisheries. You know, you've got Congressman Begich here today, Senator Sullivan. I told him he was going to get weathered out of ADAC. I said, I'm coming to the Kenai, and I'll cover for you here at the roundtable. I said, but you're going to get weathered out. And of course, he got weathered out. So he is coming later. But I think it's fair to say you have a very united delegation when it comes to making sure that we're attending to the ways that we can not only look to the health of the fisheries, but all that goes with them. Everything that it means for community projects here in the region and across the state to support our fisheries. All that we can do to improve our waterways. And so it's everything from making sure that we're funding the fisheries surveys, not only adequately, but in numbers that are going to be meaningful. It's making sure that our regional fisheries management councils and our fisheries commissions are funded, that ADF&G and its partners are supported as they're doing their work to understand not only the marine, but also the freshwater life stages of the Pacific salmon, and then what we do to support the Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund. We've got a lot that goes on within our appropriations. We're working right now through our FY26 appropriations bills. We've got good funding, solid funding for habitat conservation programs. We've got, again, support for the Pacific Salmon Treaty. People might not think about it, but wildfires have impact on our fisheries in ways that relate to again, the health of our waters and our streams. And so making sure that we are dealing with wildfire mitigation, the funding that we provide for salmon-related research and conservation. So there's a lot that happens at the federal level to support what goes on here at the state and the community level. But I'm hopeful again that when we think about what organizations like the Kenai River Sportfishing Association do, not just to fulfill their mission, but to broaden it out to not only those who are blessed to call this place home, but those who choose to come here for that 10-day or 2-week vacation, the people who choose to be here for a period of time, and who look at this as just an extraordinary gift that comes from the Kenai River. I can't look at my friend Meryl Sikorsky without thinking about the Caring for the Kenai and the contest that goes on every year where you engage young people in the region to just do projects, write stories about what they can do for this river, for this community, and for the blessings that it continues to give. So it takes a community. You're doing a great job. And if we had time, I would suggest that we all get out on the river. We'd be late for the reception, but it might be worth it. So we'll see you out there. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And since I'm the only thing standing in the way of you guys getting on with your day, thank you. See you next year.